and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Shona Lindsay and I'm joined today by three experts here in the studio. First of all, let me introduce you to Stephen Galpin, a property consultant, to John Howard, who is a property developer and an author, and to Paul Mahoney, who is the Managing Director of Nova Finance Group. Hi, gentlemen. So let's crack straight on with these questions. The first question for you, Stephen, if I may. I started looking at an apartment in London's Docklands 2 years ago. With the amount of new towers going up, I thought the values would drop. Instead, it seems that prices are still rising and I've missed the boat. What's likely to happen to the prices in Docklands with all these new towers and when they're finished?
Well, what a super question. I wish I knew the answer. I'd be quite well off if I did. Look, go back 20 years to the inception of the Docklands development, and people 2 years after that were saying that they'd missed the boat and probably should have bought earlier. But it's been a progressive rise over this last 15 or 20 years until probably 2 years ago, when things have gone a little bit flat, like they have across London in many areas for properties, especially when you get perhaps over 750,000. Mm-hmm. Now, all the top agents are predicting a bounce in 2020 when the consequences of Brexit become clear. A lot of the properties down here in Docklands, I mean, we're in the Nova Hotel here in Canary Wharf, and I can think of one development 2 minutes from here that's 1,000 apartments in one building. But nearly all sold, doing extremely well, a lot of overseas money, and those overseas buyers will tend to keep the prices fairly stable. I would say now is probably a good time to buy. I think over the next 2 years, I think there will be a little bit of a bounce. In Canary Wharf here, we're still probably 50% behind some of the better areas in the West End of London, and I don't believe that differential is sustainable. So either those properties in the West End are going to come down or these are going to go up. Yeah. And I think
a bit of both.
Probably, but I think the real possibility is that these will rise, and I think 2020 will see the significant rises.
So you still think that there is room to make money in this area of the London market?
I do.
And is there more room for more building in this area as well?
Well, there are some 20-odd thousand apartments approved for construction over the next 3 or 4 years in this area. It's only ever done good for the area. It's only ever increased prices. You tend to get over surplus of properties to rent or properties for sale. As I say, London's a worldwide market, and this in particular is, I think, pretty hot at the moment.
Sold it to me.
Okay.
You're going to be investing? Well, on that note, if I could ask you a question, John, that would be great.
Please do.
Someone's written in asking us to help them, yes. And they're looking to invest some money in property, and they're in the process of exploring all avenues with this occupation. They've been advised that if they were to employ a tradesman to do any work on a property, they need to get some sort of code off them and then call, they've put, I'm presuming, the tax people, and they tell me whether they need to deduct their money from their wages. Then they get some sort of voucher for the difference. The caller is saying that it sounds very, very complicated, and is this what all property developers do? And also, what is the best insurance for this kind of thing?
Well, the good news, I know the answer.
Oh, excellent.
So that's good.
Yes.
So it's a unique tax reference they require.
Yes.
And you get that from HMCR. Basically, if you're buying it or you're building a house to live in yourself, you don't need it.
Right. So this is only if it's a development.
Exactly. If you're developing, then you do need to speak to them and get the reference. They will then let you know whether or not you need to deduct the tax or not from the builder. Okay.
And that's based on what? Why might you have to deduct it from some person and not from some people and not another?
If the history of the building company is such that the revenue think it ought to be taxed at source.
Right, okay. And then they were asking about insurance.
Yeah, I don't quite know what they mean about the insurance. If they're building a new house, then you want to get a 10-year warranty on it. And these are very common now. They're easy to get. If it's just normal building insurance, for the building, then I'll obviously just speak to a normal broker.
Might there be some sort of employer's liability insurance? Is that maybe what they're talking about?
Yes, obviously you need that as well. I should have mentioned that, yeah.
Okay.
And a good broker will sort that out for you, no problem at all.
Great, thank you very much. Pleasure. Let's move on now to Paul. I love the beginning of this question. It makes me chuckle a little bit. This person's saying, as a moderately successful landlord, I want to know what that means, but anyway.
So do I.
I recently went to a seminar about becoming an expat. But whilst living in the sun sounds, and not paying any tax, like a good idea, I'm worried that I might still be subject to UK tax. And what would you advise?
Okay. I think what they mean by that is they're making some money and they want to mitigate tax. There's been a bit of a trend, or some or a few relatively prominent landlords have done that, and perhaps they've seen them doing that and thought, well, can I do that? So far as moving to a tax haven and trying to pay less tax because of that. It's something that obviously the government and HMRC don't like, and they've cracked down on it quite a bit, in that yes, you do still have to pay tax in the UK if that's where your properties are. And that's deducted automatically. It's supposed to be deducted automatically by your agent, just to avoid you not declaring it. Something that's come up in this show quite a bit on various questions with regards to tax is that you shouldn't let the tax tail wag the investment dog. That tax, you pay tax when you're making money. Yeah. That's a good thing. And unless you shouldn't plan your whole life around mitigating tax. You should be planning to try to make a bit more money, perhaps. But for that person, I suppose it depends on their problem. I think some of the reasons people have been considering options like that is because of Section 24, for example, where they might have had a profitable portfolio, and once that comes into full effect, they may no longer have a profitable portfolio. There are other ways of dealing with that rather than running away to Malta.
But they're not talking about cashing in their portfolio here, are they? Well, they may be, but they haven't actually mentioned that.
It seems what they're talking about is moving to an area that's taxed less than the UK to try to mitigate the tax they're paying here. Whether that is actually, whether they can actually do that or not, to be honest, I don't really know. But even if they can, they're changing their whole life based around paying a little bit less tax.
Yes, absolutely.
There's a quality of life in all this as well, isn't there? You have to balance not seeing your family or whatever it might be. They might not want to see the family, to be fair, but if they do want to see their family, living miles away is perhaps. Is it worth it?
Yeah, and then are you going to spend more coming back to visit them?
Well, exactly.
So there's pros and cons to that. I just wondered with this, because if they are holding on to their portfolio, they've obviously got to pay tax on that income because it's being earned in the UK.
They will regardless. I believe there are some strategies for perhaps paying a little bit less tax as a higher rate taxpayer, or an extra rate taxpayer. If you're living overseas, there are ways of mitigating it. So perhaps, yes, that might be an option for them, but I would say it's only one of a range of options to help them make more money. Because that's, at the end of the day, you should be looking at what you're putting in your pocket after tax.
Yes.
As opposed to just how much tax am I paying.
Yeah. And obviously if they do want to have an easier life, then that's a completely different question, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. So that's all we've got time for in this half of the show. So do join us after the break for more questions with our experts. Hi and welcome back to Property Question Time. I'm Shona Lindsay and I'm joined here in the studio by Stephen Galpin, John Howard, and Paul Mahoney. So next set of questions, gentlemen, for you please, Stephen. I'm going to inherit a house in the Brixton area shortly. I live in the country and I have no idea what it might be like to sell it as opposed to possibly keeping it and renting it out. A lot would depend on what the growth of the property market in that area might be like. And I'd appreciate the views of a London property expert.
Right, well, I'll try. Again, not an easy question, because this comes down to people's lifestyle, if you like, what their priorities are. Now look, whenever you own a property that's not within sight, of course you're trying to manage it by remote control. So as far as the letting and investment aspect of that is concerned, do you know a good letting agent? Can you find one? Can you feel comfortable with them? Because you're going to be dealing by remote control. I prefer to have properties and manage properties that are close to me, that I can see, that I can visit. So I think that's quite an important consideration. You must also remember that no matter on how small a scale, property investment is a business. Do you have a business mind?
Yes.
Do you have the kind of attitude and competence that can manage a small business? I think that's very important.
And it can be stressful as well.
Deeply stressful. Now, in terms of selling it, well, again, I would have to say, I think, why would you say, do I want to keep it? The question is, are you able to keep the investment? Could you use the money more beneficially in your normal lifestyle? However, if you do want to keep the investment, ask yourself this. Again, do you know the kind of agent that could sell it for you or rent it for you successfully? Can you trust them? Are you sure and happy with the advice that you're given? Again, selling a property is not always easy. If you're not a local owner and you're not easily accessible by the agency, you tend to go to the back of the queue a little bit just by normal business practice. I'm afraid it just happens. So you've got to feel comfortable that the property is going to be saleable and you've got the right person to sell it for you. I would suggest that worrying about the particular growth in a particular area is a bit of a dangerous strategy. It's a little bit, I know nothing about stocks and shares. The last thing I would do is buy some shares, I think, because I'm going to be 10 minutes behind the game, aren't I? The professionals are going to have the legs on me. And I think the same thing applies to property. Unless you're in a position that you can understand, really comprehend the market, then I would sell it and invest a little bit closer to where you live.
Well, I was just going to say that. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean don't get involved with buy-to-let, but perhaps bring that money to an area where you're much more familiar.
Bring it closer to home,
where
you can see it, you can control it and look after it.
Yeah, makes sense.
I think that's my answer.
I think it's a good answer.
And also, if it's a house in Brixton, and let's presume if it's an inheritance that there is no mortgage on it, that therefore that's quite a lot of money tied up in one place, isn't it? Which could be diversified, perhaps.
It's a huge amount of money. I mean, Brixton has been a good growth area over the last 10 years. Whether other parts of London are going to outstrip it in the next few, I don't know. You know, again, it's a case of if we knew the answers, we'd all be very well off.
Yes, absolutely.
But I would just urge caution and self-examination to a little.
If I could just add a slight little different take on that point about having properties close to home. A lot of people do invest quite far from home and quite successfully. So I don't think it's necessarily, although if you are starting out and you want to have a little bit more confidence and be able to see, touch and feel your property, that makes sense. You get the area. But that doesn't mean that you can't become familiar and operate in areas that are hundreds of miles from home just as successfully.
Especially if you can find someone that potentially that you can trust locally as well, who could be the person who goes around at very short notice. I think it's about having a good team as well, isn't it?
I think also, I just think on this particular question, you're talking about somebody here who's going to be, I think what the government would call an accidental landlord or an accidental investor.
Yes.
And I think the criteria is slightly different for that type of person. Although I take your point, we have a lot of people invest from all over the world in London and they do very well.
And I think also, I mean, I've invested this all over the country, but I would say certainly for your first one or two, being local is a lot easier.
So I now have a question for you, if I may, John. We have been approached by several developers, all of whom seem to be willing, subject to planning permission, to pay substantially more than local estate agent valuations for our site. Has anyone else had any experience of this method of selling a house? If so, are there any pitfalls we should be aware of? If we decide to go ahead, how do we find a solicitor specialising in this type of property transaction?
Okay, well, this is becoming very common now because planning is getting easier and easier in certain areas.
Right.
So I'm not surprised they've been offered more than the agent says, because at the end of the day, they're buying it subject to planning permission, which obviously means if they don't get the planning permission they want, they won't be purchasing the property.
Right.
Now, depending how big the piece of land is, are they being realistic about what they want to get on there? Is the developer being over-ambitious? In which case, it doesn't matter what they offer, they're never going to buy it.
Mm-hmm.
So they need some advice, and I would look at the offers they're getting and decide which one of them seems the most sensible in terms of planning. So if someone's going for three houses and the other one's going for 6, you want to know why is the difference.
Mm-hmm.
If you speak to the local planning authority, they're very helpful, and they will certainly guide you as to what will be acceptable or won't be acceptable.
In that particular area. Could this be quite a drawn-out process for them?
I would have thought if you're selling subject to planning permission, when we buy like that, we want at least 12 months to get planning.
Right, because it sounds as though they potentially have already had their house valued for a normal sale here, which, okay, how long is a piece of string? It could, but normally we're sort of saying once you get an offer, 12 to 16 weeks. Yeah. But if you're 12 months to 4 months is a massive difference.
And also, it probably has a term in the contract that says if they don't get the permission, they can go.
The sales off.
Well, one, the sales off, or they can go to appeal, and appeal takes another 6 months at least.
Oh wow!
But 50% of appeals are upheld.
Really?
So
depending, again, there's still no guarantee.
Still no guarantee, but to be fair, 50% is not a bad risk if it's a lot of money, extra money they're getting.
Yes.
So and you have to be patient.
Talking about the vendor here, the person who owns the property, they, even though they wouldn't be the ones applying for the planning permission, they can ask the planning department for that advice based on what these potential developers have.
Absolutely. And they can also take the advice of a planning consultant as well if they wish, obviously. Personally, I wouldn't take the advice of an agent because they could be acting for one of the
Right, yes.
They could be acting for one of the potential buyers. So be wary.
Most local authorities have what they call a duty planner on daily duty, and they're quite easy to approach. They're very helpful, and they will just give you a feel as to what the council are thinking.
And it's free.
And that's, you know, you talked about, you know, whether it's six houses or 3 houses, and that all of that's going to depend on parking and access and all this sort of thing. So it's quite easy for a planner to say that's never going to happen. There's no way that's going to happen,
but you might get 3 or 4, in which case. And also, you need to investigate the people making the offer, because if they've got a good reputation of getting planning through the process, then obviously, even if they're offering a little bit less than someone else, you may want to go with the one who's got a better track record.
Yes. They've got a good relationship with that planning department.
Very, very much so. Very good point. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. Pleasure. So I have a question now for you, Paul. I love this. We all want to know this person. I have been lucky enough to receive a substantial windfall, somewhere in the region of £1.5 million, and have for a long time wanted to build a property business that will provide work and income for my family long after I've gone. I'm happy to pay some tax, basic rate would be good, but have been told that my heirs will have to pay 40% inheritance tax when I go. Surely this can't be right. I'll be running this as a business, and I thought that businesses don't pay inheritance tax. Am I wrong?
Okay. So on the inheritance tax question, investment businesses do, trading businesses don't.
Right.
So that will be the difference. So far as I understand, that is a slight grey area so far as what is a trading business and what is an investment business. But obviously an investment business is something where you park money and invest it and do nothing for it. To make that a trading business, you need to be involved in that business and actually doing something for that business. For example, and I believe there's a sort of benchmark or a rule of thumb of sort of 15 hours a week that you're actually working.
Also,
in
potentially buying and selling helps that.
Or buying and selling, you know, if you're buying and
active.
flipping, being active as opposed to just buying assets and letting them sit.
Right.
But I don't believe it necessarily needs to be buying and selling. You could have a portfolio of 20 properties where you're managing them and you're renovating them and all that sort of thing.
Yes.
That I believe that would also be considered a trading business. But it needs to remain a trading business for there to be any sort of inheritance tax concession in place.
So when this person dies and they've left the business to friends and family, the business needs to, right up until that point, be trading.
I believe so, yeah. They should definitely seek advice from a specialist in that area. It's not necessarily my area of expertise, but they should definitely seek advice on that, because obviously it's a big chunk of money, and I assume they're looking to turn that 1.5 into whatever X amount of money, and by the time they expire.
They talk about mitigating tax here, having inherited 1.5 million or thereabouts, and they're happy to pay some tax. Basic rate would be good. I'm assuming that they're talking long term there.
Well, look, even short term, a trading business can be a way of mitigating the tax of a property portfolio, especially if the whole family's involved. They could have the whole family on a £44,000 salary,
right?
And be paying, each of them would be paying 20% tax on that. And they could also be, remortgaging, reinvesting within the limited company structure, which, at the moment is 19% tax, and it's coming down to 17%. So overall, for that sort of purpose, it is quite a tax-effective vehicle for building and sustaining a portfolio. That could potentially work for them both in the short, medium, and long term.
Right, excellent. Thank you very much. Oh, yes,
I just do feel Paul's earlier point was absolutely right. Don't run a business for the sake of effective tax. It often doesn't work. Concentrate your efforts on running your business and being successful, and let your professionals worry about your tax for you. There's so much easily accessed professional advice available these days. It needn't necessarily cost you a fortune.
Well, that's all we've got time for on this edition of Property Question Time. But as ever, if you do have questions for any of our experts, do please go to the website www.propertytelevision.tv or send us a direct email to info@propertytelevision.co.uk. All that's left is to say thank you to our lovely guests, to Stephen Galpin, to John Howard, and to Paul Mahoney. See you soon on the next edition of Property Question Time. Bye.